Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Is the twin brother as close to his second brother as the second brother's wife is to the twin? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! We can call it a day. The head of the legal department of the construction company, Echo, neatly folded the documents into a plastic folder and smiled. Gentlemen, I suggest we finish our meeting in the restaurant. There is an excellent seafood restaurant at the hotel. The table is set and we can go down right now. The deputy general manager hospitably waved his hand in the direction of the elevators. I sighed. We had just signed a lucrative contract, for which our firm had worked for years. But the last thing I wanted was to spend the evening in a restaurant. To be honest, I missed Samantha and my son. We have been living for 5 years, but I still, like a boy, lose my head at the sight of his wife. I guess I'm a one-woman man and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm having a hard time separating from my family. As I put the signed papers together, I wondered what reason I could come up with for going home today. If I leave now, I will be home by morning. True, it's a pretty decent ride, almost 500 kilometers. But that's all right, I'm used to long distances and contingencies. Ever since I served in the army. Victor! I'm very embarrassed, but I won't be able to take part in the banquet. There are problems at home, so I'm leaving right now. In any case, you will visit our firm in the near future and I will do my best to make up for my departure today. I came up with an excuse on the fly and now try not to look the CEO in the eye. It's okay, Edward, the banquet is not an end in itself. I think we still have everything ahead of us. Victor smiled, and we shook hands firmly. In my room I changed my clothes. I packed a shirt and a business suit in a plastic bag. I put on my usual camouflage gear, laced up my combat boots, and put a silver medallion on a leather lanyard around my neck. I felt much freer and more confident in these clothes. Without wasting time, I threw my things in the car, checked the spare tire, and after half an hour drove off the ring road onto the highway leading to my hometown. I was fine at home, no problems at all. I just wanted to hurry up and hug my beloved wife and son. Gradually it was getting darker. It was early autumn. The prolonged rains and the first frost were still far away. The road was deserted, only at the bends did the roadside bushes stare at me, caught in the dark by my car's headlights. The engine ran smoothly, without strain. I lightly depressed the accelerator pedal, bringing the speed up to 120 kilometers per hour. The cruising speed of my car. My grandfather, my father's father, was holding on confidently to the seat of the general director of the metallurgical plant. I don't know how, but after a while he became its owner. In these turbulent times he managed not only to save the combine and jobs, but also to take the leading position in his industry in our country through reconstruction. As time went on, the plant prospered. My grandfather managed to buy and build several more factories, expanding the scope of his activities. One of the new activities was organization of production of steel structures for construction. This line of business was headed by his son, my father. Today on his behalf I signed a lucrative contract for the manufacture and supply of steel beams for a huge construction company, bringing my father's firm to a new level. But despite some autonomy, my grandfather had all the strings to run the huge household. There were 2 of us in the family. Me and my brother. We are twins. We are in our 30s. Untrained people can't tell us apart. At first even our parents could hardly tell us apart. I was the eldest, and 20 minutes after I was born Johnny was born. And that decided everything in my fate. I don't know why, but my parents gave all their love to their youngest son, having to put up with my existence. Everything was for Johnny. Toys, classes, tutors. I, as the eldest, had to defer to my younger brother in everything. My interests and desires did not interest anyone. Johnny went to tutors, studied music. He always wore a clean suit and learned good manners. I grew up on my own. I learned to play guitar by myself and joined the martial arts section. My grades were average, but after 9th grade I pushed my studies and soon I was in the top 5 in my class. I was easy in the exact sciences, and I was going to go to the Mechanical Engineering Institute. But life decided otherwise. In the 11th grade, I fell in love. The girl was wonderful. Our relationship was serious enough, and we decided to get married right after high school. Lena was also going to go to university. We decided to be a couple and live together in the dorms, thanks to the fact that they were willing to give us a room. I took everything into consideration except one thing. 2 weeks before the wedding, when I had already bought the rings, Lena called me and hesitantly asked to meet. We agreed to meet in the park, near the fountain. I arrived early and had time for a smoke, waiting for the bride. Finally, Lena showed up. And not alone. She was holding Johnny, dressed in designer jeans and a leather jacket. When she saw me, she abruptly let go of his hand and came to me. "Hi. Have you been waiting long?" As if that made any difference now. Everything was clear to me. Johnny couldn't get over the fact that I had a girlfriend. Like everything else, she had to be his. I silently shrugged my shoulders. "Edward, we don't need to see each other anymore," my ex-fiancée diligently averted her eyes. It seemed that in her trembling voice from the excitement concentrated all the universal sorrow. I fell in love. "Lena, I understand everything, no need to explain." I caught my brother's triumphant look, turned around and headed for the exit from the park. The next day I went to the enlistment office and asked to join the army. My father took my decision indifferently. I didn't explain the reason for my decision. My mother didn't care about me. At this time she was busy with another shopping spree somewhere abroad. So within 2 weeks I received a summons. I went through the medical examinations and was drafted into the internal troops. I was assigned to a reconnaissance unit of the internal troops after carefully examining my body for the presence of tattoos. At my perplexed look, the warrant officer paramedic said, "A tattoo is like a business card for a scout. All you have to do is put your last name on your 5th place to be happy. Remember, kid. Tattoos are for convicts, morons, and prostitutes." And so began my service in the intelligence service. I was a tough and stubborn guy. I soon began to make progress in the service. By the end of my first year, I was already a sergeant, branch commander. I tried to study military work well. I completed a sniper course, learned to drive a car in extreme conditions. I got good results in hand-to-hand combat. Several times I was in hot spots with my company. For participation in one operation I was even awarded a medal for bravery. I don't know for what reason my call sign was Jack. This happened 2 months before I finished my service. I was ordered to deliver an artillery spotter and cover him while he worked. The task of the squad was simple. Stay unnoticed as long as possible and identify as many enemy targets as possible. And that was it. Get away, as quietly as possible. Artillery worked next. The spotter had just finished transmitting the coordinates of the target when a machine gun hit us from the rear. The spotter shrieked and dropped his head. It was quite dark, and I could hardly make out the silhouettes of the enemy. I tried to use the intercom to contact the company commander, but all I could hear in my headphones was crackling. The enemy was intelligently jamming our frequency, preventing us from establishing a stable connection. No one was firing from our side anymore. My men were probably all dead. I turned to the dead spotter and, covering his body, flicked the radio switch. I switched to the alternate frequency and began transmitting my coordinates, thus causing artillery fire on myself. The machine gunner detected my movement and opened fire again. I could feel the bullets digging into dead body. I was not scared. I was just already mentally dead, clearly understanding that only a miracle could save me. The last thing I remembered was the whistling of shells and the rumble of explosions all around me. Then the rest of my squad broke through to me and dragged me, stunned, to the rear. I didn't even have a scratch. Only a slight contusion. Apparently God still needed me for something. Just before demobilization, all of us, who had survived the battle, ordered a souvenir medallion from a jeweler I knew. We had the material. A broken silver pectoral cross. There was enough for all of us. Only 7 people survived that battle. The time of service flew by quickly, and I was soon discharged. At the train station, to my great surprise, I was met by my former fiancée, who was in tears. Lena clutched frantically at the sleeve of my camouflage and sobbed hysterically for forgiveness. I even felt a little sorry for her. But I ripped her fingers, with painted red nails, from the sleeve and, without saying a word, went to the cab rank. She remained standing on the platform, hands clasped in despair, looking at me with weeping eyes. Traitors cannot be forgiven. Yes, she must not have had a good life with my rich brother. My parents had moved to a mansion outside the city. Johnny, who had graduated from a technical university in the capital and was already the vice president of my father's firm for economic relations, lived with them. I did not go home. I stayed with a bachelor friend from the army for a few months. I submitted my documents to the Machine Building Institute. I arranged my lodging in a dormitory. I had no desire to meet my relatives, let alone my brother. A month after my return, my grandfather found me. We were drinking tea together for a long time in a small room in the dormitory. And then he suddenly offered me a job at the factory. As an auxiliary worker in the machine shop. What did you think, a director? I needed the money. The work schedule was flexible enough, so I took it. I didn't really make friends with anyone at work. Nobody knew me. I mean, nobody recognized me. I worked like that for almost 5 years. I met Samantha, a nice girl, at a party, and after 6 months of courtship I married her. I hadn't planned a big wedding, but on the day of the wedding my parents and Johnny came to our banquet. Samantha was shocked. She stared at my brother and me for a long time, wondering at our resemblance. My father gave us an apartment and a car for our wedding. My young wife was over the moon. She did a slow dance with my father and brother. And at the end of the evening I happened to catch Johnny's lustful gaze on my wife. A year later we had a son. I was happy as if I was in outer space. We lived without communicating with our relatives. Johnny came to visit us a couple of times. But no creeping in the direction of Vicky on his part, I did not notice. 6 months ago I successfully graduated from college and my father appointed me deputy chief of marketing in his firm. I went into direct subordination to my brother. Business trips began. Audits, signing contracts. Everywhere Johnny put me. My wife was initially unhappy with my frequent absences, but then got used to it. That's how we lived all this time. The car swerved. Damn, I must have dozed off. Took it to the side of the road and pulled over, turning on the hazard lights. Got out of the car and did a few push-ups. Patted myself on the cheeks. I was falling asleep early. It was only the first hour. I started off smoothly. The road snaked under my wheels like a gray snake again. Around another turn, the headlights illuminated a large black car pressed against the side of the road. I could see a thin woman's silhouette struggling desperately between two large black figures. She had no chance of success. The highway was deserted at this time, and there was no help to be had. I looked up at the sky. The ragged disk of the moon was casting a gentle glow over the road. There was no Batman in sight. And there's no such thing as a Batman in our neck of the woods. Who screams in the night, caught in the clutches of ruthless predators? Alas, such is the prose of life. Tomorrow they'll find the body of a young girl in the roadside bushes, and the detective, not yet sober from his drunkenness, will be swearing to himself as he surveys the scene. A criminal case will be opened, which will never be solved. After a while the girl's body would end up in the cemetery, and the file would eventually find its way into the archives. I got out of the car. 2 big guys were dragging the girl, who was desperately struggling, into the black SUV. She tried to scratch and bite, but a whipping slap put a stop to those feeble attempts. The SUV's rear right window was lounging, and a light cigarette smoke swirled from it. Finally, the guys twisted the woman and carried her to the car. It was clear how this mise-en scene would end. Real life is different from the happy endings in the movie world. But sometimes there are exceptions. The thugs paid no attention to the blue Suzuki. I walked leisurely toward the black car, hiding my baseball bat behind my back for the time being. And they told me it wouldn't come in handy. Oh, yes, you do. The girl realized that the situation had changed and started lashing out again. I came close to the participants in the crime drama. Apparently, some subconscious dashing fighters realized that the approach is not just a sucker. The brutal sense of danger had entered their unburdened brains. Let go of the girl, I said firmly, and as soon as the nearest bandit tried to say something, I struck him in the face with the bat. Without a swing. Just like the instructor Petrenko had taught me. There was a distinctive crunch, and he fell on his side. The second one let the girl out of his hands and rushed at me, tilting his head like a bullfrog. I took a step to the side and punched him in the temple with my knuckles. He collapsed on his colleague without a hitch. The car door slammed. The third character in this play appeared. A pistol glinted in his hands in the moonlight. I stepped out of the line of sight and was beside him in one leap. I gripped the Beretta from above and pressed the magazine release button. I heard it drop to the pavement. At the same time I turned on the safety flag. The subject, who did not understand anything, squeezed the trigger again and again, but no shot was fired. That's a shame. Give it back. I took the gun out of the poor guy's hands and knocked him out with a blow to the back of my hand. I bent down and picked up the magazine. There was silence. The girl was gone. A red shoe and a purse were lying on the pavement. I took out the knife and carefully cut all 4 tires. Sharply honed, the Tonto cut through the Michelin rubber easily. I took another look at the battlefield and headed for my car. I slipped my trophy pistol under the seat. In a moment, I was back on the highway. 500 meters later, I saw a limping girl walking quickly in my direction. She didn't even think to hide in the roadside bushes. I pulled up beside her. Get in! I opened the right front door. She stared at me stunned. Get in, don't be afraid, they're gone. She stood silent for a while, then hesitantly climbed into the front seat. Here you are. I handed her a bag and a shoe. It looks like yours. She silently took her things and held them to her chest. She did not look in my direction. Where are you going? I asked the right question. To my surprise, she called my city. I smiled and increased my speed. As we arrived, I knew her story. The girl's name was Helen. 20 years old. Her father was gone, her mother was a drunk. Last year Helen graduated from high school and came to the capital. Didn't get into university. She tried to find a job. But she couldn't. A friend suggested she earn money with her body. A pimp showed up. Passport was taken away. Been in the profession for over a year now. As long as she's young, she's a success. Then they put her on pills and sell her to an underground brothel. In 3 years, she'll die of an overdose. It's a short but true story of a night butterfly. Tonight the pimp drove her and her friend to a client. He loves the young ones. The girlfriend stayed and she drove home to the town I live in. On the way, the cab driver started pestering her, got his, and threw her out of the car. Then these 3 men showed up in a black Lexus. There's no telling how it would have ended if it hadn't been for me. We got into town early in the morning. I took the passenger to the address, a dilapidated 1-story cinder block hut, and I drove home myself. On the way, I stopped at a convenience store and bought a bouquet of flowers, chocolates, and a bottle of champagne. There was an unfamiliar car parked in my driveway. Weird. I went up to my floor and opened the door to my apartment. I went into the kitchen. I put the bottle on the table and made my way to the bedroom. Trying not to make any noise, I opened the door. They were lying in their arms like newlyweds. Samantha laid her head on his hairy chest, sniffling sweetly. It was idyllic. I slept next to her. Or rather my other self. My twin brother. He didn't even cover himself with a blanket, exposing his bosom. I went back to the kitchen and opened the champagne. Then I went back into the bedroom and started pouring the voluptuousness. Samantha woke up and, seeing me, rolled off the bed. Edward! Don't! I'm begging you. That's not it. She didn't scream, she squealed, breaking into a falsetto. Johnny, seeing me smirked and, without covering himself, stood up and stretched. You're early. I grabbed him by the throat with one hand. I just had to squeeze my fingers and that was it. Well, what are you going to kill me? My brother smiled defiantly. She's my woman, for a long time now. I'm just taking what's mine. I shifted my gaze to Samantha. My wife wrapped her knees and burst into sobs. Forgive me, forgive me. I love only you, she kept repeating it like a spell. I wish I knew what that love was called. That's when it hit me. How long have you been together? I looked at Samantha. Enough to give birth to a son. Johnny answered for her. I felt like a sledgehammer blow to the head. A son? Dima is not my son? I suddenly began to suffocate. Everyone knows it except you. Johnny laughed. Let go of me. He threw my hand away. My punch to the jaw lifted his body above the floor. Johnny flew over the wide bed and collapsed, hitting his head against the wall. Only his bare feet were sticking out from behind the bed. Samantha in her corner was already calling someone on the cell phone. Come quickly. Edward's here. My first wish was to get out of here as quickly as possible. I couldn't be in the same room as those freaks. The corrupt wife, who had been having an affair behind my back for almost 5 years, and the idiot Johnny. I couldn't call him a brother. I didn't want to get into the philosophy of family relationships, it just made my fists itch. I even began to fear that I would just kill him first, and then this thing that took over the body of my beloved woman. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of vodka, which happened to be in the fridge. I was about to drink it, but I stopped. I put the glass on the table. One should drink with joy, not with sorrow. Something told me that I had to stay sober and that this was not the last event of the day. I was right. The front door slammed and my parents flew in, out of breath. I sat in the kitchen and looked out the window, gathering what strength I had left to calm down. My father came into the kitchen. Where is Johnny? What have you done with him? I expected all sorts of things, but not this kind of care. Ivan, Johnny is here. Mother's voice came from the bedroom. Father rushed into the bedroom. There was a commotion. Apparently, they were bringing my wife's lover to his senses. I was disconnected from everything. I didn't care what happened next. I saw no sympathy from my father. Only concern for the fate of his beloved son. He and mother were aware of everything, knowing full well about the connection of this scoundrel with my wife. They knew about the son. They knew and kept quiet. Or worse, they knew and supported him. I felt so disgusted that I wanted to vomit. I automatically started calculating my next move. It was clear that my marriage was over, my job was over too. I cannot see every day this creature who was once my brother. I have to move out of the apartment. Samantha crept quietly into the kitchen. Edward! It's your brother. I just couldn't resist. You have the same face. Dimka is not a stranger to you too, his own nephew. You won't leave us, will you? Edward, don't be silent. Samantha whimpered, wrapping her arms around my legs. Beat me if you want. Just don't go away. I was so squeamish that I got up and went to the window. The sun had already risen, and its rays were reflecting sunlight off the Vitara parked right under the window. I was finally able to pull myself together. The true reasons for my long business trips became clear. While I was away solving company business, Johnny was sleeping with my wife. My parents came into the kitchen. Edward, do not make a tragedy of what happened. We are one family and we have to stick together. My father began. Don't make any rash decisions. I've already made my decision. I only have one question. Did you know about this? Did you know my son wasn't mine? I spoke calmly, even casually. Not a muscle flinched on my face. My father was silent. My mother cried softly. Everything was clear. It was Johnny, their favorite son. How could he be deprived of another toy? But Samantha. Why did she do this to me? Did she fall for the money? Was she in love so much that she decided to give birth to another man's child? Or was it just a woman's stupidity? I went silently into the corridor. My father tried to block my way. You're not going anywhere. He grabbed my sleeve. Get your hand off me. He sensed something in my voice and quickly took his hand away. I'm going away. Don't try to contact me. You don't have a second son. You never did. I'll file for divorce today. I looked at Samantha. In a suit to annul paternity. Dimka has a real father, so let him raise him. He's your son. He loves you. You won't leave him and me. I won't give you a divorce. Samantha was hysterical. My father slapped me on the cheek with his palm. What are you talking about? Get over yourself. It's your wife and son. I grabbed him by the chest. The mother cried out. Edward, don't you dare. It's your father. If you touch me again, I'll kill you, you old idiot. I pushed my father away from my mother. I took my unpacked bag, walked past smirking Johnny, who was standing in the bedroom door, and out to the stairwell. Edward! Don't go! Vicky's hysterical scream was the last thing I heard before the door slammed shut. I was choking with rage. I stared blankly in front of me for a while, then started the engine and drove along the white lime-painted curb. There was Johnny's smirking face in front of my eyes. With what pleasure I would have smeared his insolent face on the wall. But was it worth the jail time? I think not. In the end I was alone, with no wife, son, family, job, or place to live. Zeroed out, so to speak. Well, I had to find some way to settle in. I took out my cell phone and dialed a familiar number. At the other end very quickly answered. Hello, Elephant? I ran the car with one hand and held the cell phone in the other. It's Edward. Got a minute? Hello, Jack. To my army friend, I was still Jack. He stubbornly refused to call me by my name. It used to annoy me a little. But now I felt a little warmer in my heart. I need to stay somewhere for a while again. I haven't decided whether or not to tell a friend about my troubles. I have problems. I don't have a place to live yet. I see. The elephant caught my thoughts on the fly. Let's go to my place. There's a place here. Half an hour later we were drinking scented tea in the kitchen. I categorically refused the offered food. After what I'd been through a bit of it, I couldn't eat a bite down my throat. My cell phone beeped. On the screen popped up a name, Samantha. I dropped the call. Fight with his wife? Pouring me a hot tea with a wry grin, he asked. It is much worse. With a sigh I answered, it is much worse. The elephant was silent with understanding. He knew what worse meant. Well, are you ready? We can go right now. My friend looked at his watch. It's not far. In the private sector, half an hour away. I didn't drive fast behind Elephant's car. Indeed, we took the dirt road and 20 minutes later drove up to a small house, standing in the back of a neglected plot. An inheritance from my grandmother, Elephant. I don't know what to do with it. I'm sorry to sell it, but I have no time to do it. So far I have made a man's den here. Come on. Elephant opened the lock on the gate and let me through. The cabin led to the barely visible path in the grass. Well, here, look. The elephant gingerly opened the door. Live as long as you like. He came to a cast iron stove standing almost in the middle. There is wood. The stove heats up very quickly. A couple of stacks and it's hot in here. You can keep warm in your underpants. Besides, it's not cold yet. The elephant opened the flap and looked inside the cast iron fireplace. Well, I have to go to work. And you make yourself comfortable, and if there's anything, call me. He went out, and after a while I heard the sound of a car driving away. I went to get my bag, took out my jeans and t-shirt. I hung them on the back of the chair. Let them hang up, because they were crumpled up in the bag. I looked around curiously. The inside of the house was clean and cozy. The cabin itself was made of pine logs, and the room had a persistent aroma of resinous pine. On a thin carpet over the sofa hung several hunting knives without sheaths and an old rifle without a bolt, giving the whole room a hunter's charm. The sleepless night was making itself felt. I turned off my phone, covered by a blanket, and fell asleep on the couch. I walked across the day's sun-heated sand. Everything around me was full of some wild beauty. The night sky was strewn with green twinkling stars. There was a girl standing beside me, and I held her hand tightly, as if I was afraid she would leave me, dissolve in the serene silence of the night. She wrapped her arms gently around my neck and our lips met. But my heart was filled with anxiety at the imminent disaster. I knew that at some point the girl would disappear, and there was nothing I could do about it. "Don't go away," I whispered in her ear. "Just don't go." When I woke up, it was almost dark. I tried to remember the dream that had slipped away, but my brain refused to obey me. All that was left was the longing gnawing away at my insides. I looked in the refrigerator. I see. It would be strange if there was something there. I pulled on my jeans and t-shirt, laced up my sneakers, and threw on my camouflage jacket. I put on my favorite black baseball cap without a visor. I locked the front door and headed for the car. It was already perceptibly cool. I rolled down the window and pressed down on the gas pedal. The car raced along the ring road, torpedoing into the night air. I did not know the area well and oriented myself by the glowing storefronts. The private sector was replaced by two-story barracks, built at one time for the mill workers. Some of the windows were lit up. At the end of the street I saw the green window of a grocery store. I picked up some alcohol, a couple of bottles of cognac, 2 packs of dumplings, a couple of tins of dry potatoes, pickles, bread, and some canned fish. I also brought 2 dozen eggs. That should be enough for the first time. True, how long would this first time? I had no idea. At the checkout I handed my card. A sleepy lady ran it over the terminal a few times and looked at me disappointed. Access to the card was blocked. She summed up in a tense voice. "Don't worry, I'll pay in cash." I handed over the money, picked up the bags, and went to the car. I get it, Daddy blocked my cards. After all, it was money I had honestly earned. My almost unused paycheck. Good thing I managed to cash almost half of it. Mentally, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Shit, I'd turned it off. When the screen came back on, I was bombarded with a barrage of messages and missed calls. Without reading, I deleted the garbage and drove home. To turn around, I had to drive to the end of the alley, to the intersection. I had already turned left when my attention was drawn to the stirring near the archway leading into the courtyard of a 2-story barack. A bunch of half-dressed, painted girls were piled up against the wall of the house, watching intensely as 2 guys methodically beat their almost-without-nothing colleague. One of them was holding the poor prostitute by the hair, wrapped around her arm for comfort. I rolled down the right window. The execution took place in silence. The guys went about their usual business, bringing up their ward. The girl did not resist and obediently endured quite strong blows. She only made a sound pitifully. She did not even try to get away from her tormentors. It was understandable. It was an occupational hazard. Pimps bring up the contingent. It's not worth it to interfere. The girl was no longer on her feet and collapsed under the street light. For a moment her bloody face was in the light. Her producers did not stop beating her, only, instead of fists, they started kicking her. The victim was no longer sounds, but wheezing. Her face looked familiar. Exactly, it was Helen, my fellow traveler from the night. In fact, a comrade in arms. An intelligence does not abandon their own. I jumped out of the car with my baseball bat. "Hey! Stop hitting her!" I shouted as I was approaching the scene of the execution. One of the managers turned around. He showed his face to me. That's what I was waiting for. The impact, the crunch and clatter of a fallen body. The second character reacted instantly and rushed into the alley. But my rage was hiccuping and I caught up with him in 2 jumps and hit him in the spine with the bat. The pimp collapsed like a stone. That kind of blow made his legs give out. The fallen man was lying on the pavement, drooling bloodily and twitching his lower limbs. I looked around. I carefully picked up the lying maiden and carefully placed her on my shoulder. I carried her off and put her in the car. She just looked at me, eyes frozen in a mute cry, and make a sound softly. I turned around and drove home, avoiding the potholes. Helen was lying on the couch, and I cut off her rags with a knife. When I saw her body without clothes, I involuntarily shuddered. There was one big bruise on her stomach. Her legs were covered in abrasions and cuts. There were traces of extinguished cigarettes on the inside of her thighs and in her groin. Face smashed and swollen. What kind of a brute would abuse a woman like that? I gingerly felt her limbs and ribs. The girl was making sounds normally. The bones appeared to be intact. But I had already realized that I could not cope. I can't take her to the hospital. The doctor would call the police right away. I dialed Elephant's number. Half an hour later he arrived with a bearded man. Samuel, the doctor, he introduced himself. Where's the body? That's his humor. The doctor deftly gave her an anesthetic shot and washed her wounds with peroxide. He applied bandages. She was lucky, her bones were intact. But she's in bad shape. This is cure. He handed me a red packet. Give me 2 pills every 6 hours. Do not worry, your friend will make it. I shook his hand and looked questioningly at the elephant. The doctor caught my look. Do not need anything. Victor has already paid me off. Elephant patted my shoulder and he and the doctor left. And I moved the chair closer to the lying girl and poured myself a whole glass of cognac. When I was a kid, I loved to ride the railroad. I liked to look out the window, especially when the train was at a station. The station was always on the right side of the tracks. There was an oncoming track on the left. When a train was going over it, I had an impression that our train was moving. And the oncoming one stood still. But as soon as I looked to the right, the illusion of movement disappeared. It reminded me of my family life. I kept looking to the left, mistaking the illusion of motion for truth. But in fact my train was standing, and I, lulled by my so-called happiness, never bothered to look to the right. Only now I began to understand that the situation was quite happy with Samantha. What did she have to lose? The face next to her on the pillow is the same, and the rest is just a romantic adventure. My wife was well aware of what she was doing. She knew very well that the child would look like me in any case. She gave herself to my brother with enthusiasm, with all her soul and body. At the same time she was a pious believer in family values, carefully imitating numerous orgasms with me, so that I would not suspect anything. My parents knew everything from the beginning. They were quite happy with the situation. The grandson was theirs in any case, the more so from their favorite son, the heir. Well, I would have survived, content with scraps from the table, you know what I mean. From the parents' point of view, mine and Vicky's, nothing egregious happened. Just a little embarrassment. The horny husband found out. But that's okay, he'll get over it and come back to the family. All they had to do was wait. And they waited, blocking all my debit cards, thus leaving me with no money. Regularly Samantha sent messages and called. The content was the usual. I love you, I'm sorry. We'll have another son, yours. Then she was joined by her mother. She tried to shame me and pity me. It was hard to manipulate me. I completely cut them out of my life, cutting off all ties. If all of them, including not my son, had fallen through the earth, I would have only shrugged and sighed in relief, getting rid of those things. I didn't hesitate to file for divorce at the same time I filed for paternity. The court ordered a genetic test, no matter how my family protested, calling me paranoid and an idiot. Bottom line, I am not the father. You should have seen their disappointed faces. I wonder what they were hoping for. Then the trial took place. We came to the hearing with Elephant. He had been my guardian lately, trying to be there for me at all times. All these judicial adventures were getting on my nerves. The judge listened carefully to all the streams of lies and filth, which diligently poured on me by former relatives. When the word was given to Johnny, she perked up. She had the semblance of a smile on her face and kept looking from him to me. The lawyer for that family was jumping out of his pants in his closing speech, accusing me of everything that had happened. Then the floor was given to me. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't want anything from them. I left everything to my ex. The apartment, the car. I left my father's company and didn't claim the inheritance. I didn't know my grandfather's position. He had been abroad all that time and didn't seem interested in the family problems. Finally, the judge announced her decision. Divorce, no alimony for my son or wife. I'm not the father. The judge also advised me to sue my father's company for my severance pay and the last month's earnings. As she did so, she looked very expressively at my father, who even cringed under her gaze. With a swing of the hammer, Elephant and I were on our way out. My car was in the parking lot, about 500 meters from the courthouse. The Elephant ran to the store on the way out, to buy some cognac. To celebrate freedom. I was walking leisurely to the car when I heard a noise above my ear. Satisfied, you idiot. A hard blow from behind knocked me down, and I fell forward, barely having time to set my arms. Before I knew what had happened, the toe of my boot hit me in the face. My eyes went black and I fell on my back. Johnny was leaning over me. Next time I'll kill you. He almost screamed. My father ran up and tried to pull him away from me. But my ex-brother managed to kick me in the side with his boot. Edward! Samantha came running up to me screaming. She knelt down and tried to lift my head to stop the blood gushing from my nose. Honey, are you in pain? I almost threw up at those words, and quickly pulled myself together. It was a matter of seconds before I was on my feet. I pushed away Samantha, who had already become a stranger, and turned to my brother. I saw, out of the corner of my eye, Elephant running across the street toward me. A crowd had gathered around us. Many were filming everything on their phones. Johnny broke free of his father's grasp and rushed at me. It was his fault. I met him with the back of my hand on his forehead. He froze for a while and then collapsed like a dead man at my feet. I didn't finish him off. Someone in the crowd clapped. A police car howled on the lawn. They were on time, as always. And there I was, already handcuffed, on my way to the station. When Johnny came to his senses, he filed a report on me for a brutal, gratuitous beating. All my relatives, except for Samantha and my ex-mother, confirmed it. But then Elephant appeared on the scene with the cell phone recording. Everything began to fall into place. They took the handcuffs off me and offered to write a complaint, this time against Johnny. But I spat under my feet and, accompanied by Elephant, went out. How the excursion to the precinct ended for my former family, I don't know. The only thing I remember was my mother crying with terror in her eyes. I wondered if she understood everything already. Toward midnight, the cold began to be felt. I looked at the couch. The girl was asleep, make a sound softly in her sleep. I carefully readjusted the slipped-down blanket. I went outside. The full moon was brightly illuminating the yard with a bluish-green light. I threw a few small logs on the bend of my arm, added a couple of stakes for kindling, and went back to the cabin. In a few minutes the stove hummed, crackling with burning wood and filling the room with the smell of smoke. Immediately it felt cozier and warmer. I took cognac out of the fridge and poured myself another half glass. I immediately felt sleepy. I sat down in an armchair and disconnected from reality. Where was I? I was awakened by a loud cry from Helen. "Do not worry, you're our friends." I tried my best to reassure her. She flinched at my voice and tried to shake her legs. She seemed to inadvertently cause pain, because she make sounds loudly. She looked at me and tried to remember how she knew me. "I gave you a ride into town last night. My name is Edward, and I met you. Do you remember?" I spoke quietly, so as not to frighten. "And where?" She was afraid to formulate her question. "Your friends? They're gone, and I hope they won't be any more. You need to lie down for a while. And then you can leave, if you want to." I handed her the medicine. "Take a pill." Helen looked at me expectantly. It seemed that she expected another meanness from life, this time in my face. "How did I get here?" "I brought you here. I'm kind of responsible for you now. Don't worry about it. Just take it as it comes. It's hard for me to explain the simple truths to you." I smiled. "You hungry?" I put the frying pan on the stove, and soon the room smelled of food. Helen ate quickly, as if she was afraid I would take food away from her. I brewed tea from the elephant's supply and, after pre-cooling, handed the cup to the girl. Then I helped her to go to the bathroom and placed her back on the couch, covered with a blanket. Soon she fell asleep. In the evening, Elephant arrived and brought groceries. Reported the situation. It's quiet in town, no one's making a fuss. I checked with the guys. Nobody's looking for her. He nodded at Helen, who was asleep. After a week, Helen began to get up, and after another 5 days, hiding her eyes, she asked, "Can I leave?" "Of course, no one is holding you back. You can right now." I turned away and continued peeling potatoes. Something I wanted: fried potatoes. So I'll cook for myself and Elephant. I didn't care if the girl stayed or not. In fact, her leaving relieved me of a lot of problems. So good riddance. Helen was standing in the middle of the room, covered with a sheet, holding the remains of her dress. I rummaged in my bag and pulled out my tracksuit. "Here, put it on. You can have my jacket." "Wait," I rummaged in the closet. On the bottom shelf were old women's shoes. "Put them on, maybe they'll fit." Helen put on my clothes and immediately looked like a retired warrant officer. "All in all, it will do. Do you want a lift or a cab?" "A cab would be better." She sniffed her nose. "Thank you." The cab arrived quickly. I didn't go to see Helen off. It's hard to get a man out of the shit, especially if he doesn't want to. People get into prostitutes in different ways, and not always by force. Raising her is not my problem. I did it, I helped her, and then it's up to her. You can't save everyone. A week after the divorce, my cards started working. I received last month's salary and severance pay. Life was more fun. But it couldn't go on like this for long. I had to find a job. My father's enterprises were closed to me, as well as other industries in our city. Several times I tried to find out about the job, but when I barely heard my name, the personnel fell into a stupor and shut up, making it clear that the conversation was over. Only one head of a small plant, smiling affectionately, advised to turn to Rokotov Ivan, that is, my father. And with him to solve the problem of employment. In short, my ex-family tightly put me. In the end, Elephant managed to get me into a small car service on a small salary. Its owner flew too low and was not in the circle of interests of my ex-brother and his daddy. I hadn't made any plans yet and was going to spend the winter at Elephant's and then go to the east in search of work in the spring. Late at night there was a timid knock at the door. I looked at the wall clock. First hour, a little late. Helen was standing at the door, shivering from the cold. "May I come in?" "Come in," I stepped aside. The girl was holding a bag and was wearing my camouflage jacket. She walked over to the stove and held out her cold hands. "How's business?" I said ironically. "Would you like some tea?" "I do." I handed her an aluminum mug with freshly brewed, almost black tea. Helen drank the tea, trying not to look in my direction. There was a pause. "Edward, can I stay?" She sighed heavily. "What's wrong?" "You have a room." I put a candy in front of my guest and moved the stool as a coffee table. My neighbor snatched the room from me, and he'll give it back to me if I go to bed with him. He said it wouldn't kill me. I've been living with a friend all this time, and she's getting married. So she kicked me out. The girl looked at the blazing fire in the stove. I have nowhere to go. The only thing left is a noose. Tears came out of her eyes. "So you came for the rope?" I grinned. She looked at me with such a look that I choked back a laugh. "All right, stay. Only I have one room and one couch. You're at the wall, I'm at the edge." I threw up my hands. "We'll think of something later." Elephant arrived in the morning. He wasn't at all surprised to see Helen. "Come on, let's talk." He was the first to go out into the yard. "There is a job, but it's far away. The pay is good." "How far is it?" "East. Today we have to meet with the customer." I was told beforehand that the job was to be done in the army. The elephant chewed his lips. Hot spot? Handling the joints of corrupt politicians? I was disappointed. Sounds like something else. "We'll see in the field, there's no need to get boisterous." The elephant grinned. We can always say no. Where are we meeting? At Troika's restaurant. They'll come to us. The elephant went to the car. Get in, let's go. I went back for my jacket, nodded at Helen, and followed Elephant. There weren't many people in the restaurant with a dubious reputation. A couple of people at the window were taking their health care, and me and Elephant. After a while, a man came up to our table and without asking permission sat down across from us. His whole appearance emphasized solidity, and at the same time, he looked like a cobra ready to lunge. An ex-military man, probably a special forces man. Invisible vibes of danger, mingled with the scent of expensive perfume, enveloped our table in a mist. A stylish gray suit in small checks, worn over a blue shirt without a tie, an insanely expensive Swiss watch, and a platinum ring on the ring finger of his left hand completed the image. Exactly as it should be worn by a confident, successful man. My name is Victor. He began without preamble. I take it this is the man you were talking about? The elephant nodded. Let's get down to business. You know who I represent. The master is getting married. Our interlocutor smiled at that, and he's going to retire and give his business to his daughter. He has recalled her from London and begun to acquaint her with the business. He sent her to the east, to the gold mines. Nellie flew safely to the place, checked into a hotel, and disappeared. She didn't get in touch for a week. Naturally, the owner got worried. We were able to figure out that Nellie had been kidnapped by local thugs. Not for ransom, but mainly for intimate gratification. They're holding her in the woods. We know the place. Victor ran his hand over his face as if to relieve his fatigue. It is necessary to return her, having first cleared everybody out. Well, you understand. Unfortunately, we do not have specialists of your level. That's why I'm here. What's the price? The elephant spoke up. $5,000 each now, and 10 after the issue is resolved. 20, and do what you want with us. In the words of a movie character, the elephant replied. I agree. The man nodded. When do we leave? The elephant took a sip of coffee, which had already cooled down. Yesterday. Do not take anything with you, you will get everything on the spot. You will be met and given a guide. Here's the money. Victor looked at me too intently and pushed 2 envelopes in our direction. In 2 hours the car will pick you up. He stood up, and without saying goodbye, headed for the exit. The 2 drunkards sitting by the window quickly followed him out. We'll be gone for a while, you'll be in charge. Helen flinched. Do you drive? She nodded. I put the keys on the stool. Take mine. They'll ask about us. Well, if they do, you know nothing. We just disappeared. And that's it. I instructed my lodger. I'll leave you the money. I put $1,000 next to the keys. That'll be enough till we get back. Well, I have to go. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. Edward, wait. The girl came right up to me. Just come back, you hear? Please come back. She hugged me impetuously and pressed her whole body against me for a second. I could taste the kiss on her lips. In her eyes I caught something more than just sadness at parting. It all happened very quickly. I came to my senses when she made a sound. It was the first time I'd ever been seen off in such a way. We got there without any adventures. From the airport we were taken to a local bed and breakfast, mistakenly called a hotel. We dropped our things and went to get our gear. Victor wasn't lying. We were fitted out in winter camouflage, white camouflage cloaks and wide skis. We took 2 submachine guns with silencers, a Stechkin pistol each, and a pair of tactical backpacks, complete with an unloading kit. Winter boots, gloves, everything we could possibly need. I even managed to run through the local market, contrary to instructions. I bought an antique stiletto and a self-made camouflage scabbard from a wino for a mere pittance. The perfect weapon for close combat. How the wind blew him into this neck of the woods is hard to imagine. We had managed to sleep for about 3 hours when a protective colored Jeep came to pick us up. We drove about 160 miles, then turned onto a country road. After about 30 kilometers the car stopped. We walked the rest of the way. The driver helped me take things out of the trunk, turned the Jeep around and drove off. Out of the gloom, a man in a warm jacket with a rifle over his shoulder came skiing. "Vasily, your guide." He introduced himself. I nodded. Elephant and I jumped a little. Our equipment did not make noise. We put on skis and one by one we followed our guide away from the road. The night was frosty. I swallowed my saliva, readjusted my backpack, tightened my gun belt, and continued on my way, trying not to lose the back of my guide in the darkness. When packing for the trip, Elephant and I took only the bare necessities with us. Some dry rations, matches, and a few cartridges. I had a tactical knife strapped to my belt. I strapped a stiletto I'd recently bought at a flea market to my right thigh. Its camouflage scabbard blended with the color of my pants, and it was almost impossible to see it there. Great stuff for understanding people. According to our calculations, we should reach the target just before dawn. Well, calculations are calculations, but we had to go through unhiked, snow-covered virgin land. And we were tired in the middle of the night. At dawn, the main work, which threw us in these places, was yet to come. We could not stop. We were in the rhythm of movement, and any halt could take our breath away and relax us. I paced rhythmically, helping myself with the sticks, trying to breathe in time with the movement. The terrain was mostly flat, though I had to roll down a few low hills. But that's okay, they should be here soon, not far from here by my calculations. Suddenly I felt someone's unkind gaze on me. I even flinched. I looked around without slowing down. No one was there. I thought I imagined it. I am used to trust my feelings, or, more correctly, my instinct. This animal, subconscious sense of impending danger had never failed me. Neither in war, nor in everyday life. So something or someone is here after all. I turned around. Elephant was methodically waving his ski poles and following me on the beaten track. I wondered what I imagined. I began to jog gently, trying to keep my eyes on the road and on the sides. I took the safety off my gun just in case. The cartridge was in the chamber, so that if anything happened, there would be something to counter it with. Suddenly the guide stopped and raised his hand. I cautiously drove up and stood beside him. "There's someone here," the hunter said quietly. "There is an alien. He is watching us. Can he attack?" I was breathing heavily. "I don't know. If he wanted to, he would have attacked us a long time ago. I smelled him 2 hours ago. He was coming from our right, about 100 yards away." I looked cautiously in that direction, but saw nothing. I turned round and looked at the elephant, crouched with his machine gun. "What shall we do?" quietly asked the guide. "Get the job done." I looked expressively at the machine. "Let's go." It was about time the winter hut showed up. But the woods were all around, and there was no sign of habitation. Suddenly I thought the frightened guide had lost his way. But he stopped and shook his hand at me. "Here comes the edge. We are at the goal. You are on your own from here. You have the map, you can get to the point on your own." The guide unfolded skis. "Well, good luck. Aren't you afraid of going alone?" "I've been out here since I was a kid." He didn't look back, but went to the back of the along the trumped path. Soon his back, illuminated by the moonlight, was hidden behind the trees. In about an hour or so, dawn should begin to break, but the moon seemed to shine even brighter. For our expedition, such weather is worse than the worst enemy. Better would be fog with snow. Elephant came along. "Well, Commander, shall we begin?" he said quietly and fixed his belt on the submachine gun. We glided towards the hut, hiding in the shade of the trees, trying to keep so that the moon remained on the left and our shadows merged with the solid wall of the forest. At last I saw, at the opposite edge of the clearing, a long structure white in the moonlight, enclosed by a fence of corrugated sheets of galvanized iron. The 2 windows facing the clearing where Elephant and I lurked were dark. Almost immediately adjacent to the house was a log barn, and further away, on a special platform, barely covered with snow, a helicopter with sagging blades was a dark, prehistoric monster. On the side opposite the house, several tanks were visible, probably with fuel for the helicopter. Somewhere nearby, an engine was rattling, generating electricity. A lantern rattled dimly in an uneven blue light at the entrance to the cabin. I took my night binoculars out of my pack and held them up to my eyes. No dogs seemed to be in sight. We started like clockwork. I felt the familiar shiver in my body. A chill ran down my spine, a last-second feeling before the attack, when it was impossible to stop, just like you can't stop a snow avalanche when it's already started. Without turning my head, I waved my hand. In perfect silence, a figure in a white camouflage zigzagged toward the fence. In a few seconds, the elephant was on the other side of the fence, taking up position against the side wall, keeping his sights on the entrance. I leaped over the obstacle and stood close to the door. I put my hand on the knob and pulled it gently toward me. The door jerked toward me and stopped, as if it were blocked against something. It is clear, the usual hook. Holding the automatic rifle by the forend with my left hand, with my right hand I took out the knife and stuck the blade in the gap. Slightly pressed upward, pulling the door toward him, and slowly lowered the hook so as not to jingle. Cautiously he opened the door. Silence. There was a smell of home from the cabin. Elephant followed me through the doorway, keeping an eye on me, just in case. On tiptoe I slipped inside, moving quickly and silently, putting soul after soul. Judging by the vital snoring coming from behind the closed door leading to the side room, the two natives were sound asleep. I glided like a shadow along the wall, keeping my finger on the trigger. Where's the third and the captive? As if in answer to my mute question, there was a distinctive slapping and a loud lingering sound from behind the other door. I carefully pushed the door open and peered through the crack. The big male was spanking the young woman on all fours with such fervor that she periodically bumped her head against the headboard of the bed. It was good that the rug hanging there softened the blows. I could clearly see the man's white fifth place moving rhythmically in the darkness. The face was an example of the most gentle intergender friendship inherent in partners who understand each other well. It didn't look like the girl was giving herself to her beau under duress. I let him live a second longer, and then I pulled out the stiletto and plunged it right between his ribs, right into his heart. It was like an electric shock that coursed through my body, like an indescribable sensation, transmitted to the enemy along with the stabbing of the knife. The moment when the person you've killed leaves your life, and it's as if you see their soul flying away. For a moment I felt like the angel of death. The male, silently, collapsed down on the maiden. She had already opened her mouth to yell, but I managed to shove my glove into it. The girl mumbled, turning her eyes frantically. Behind me, Elephant's machine gun clicked softly twice, lighting up the corridor for a moment with dim flashes. The two bodies twitched in their beds and froze, twitching their legs convulsively in a fading rhythm. Illuminated by the full moon, nature froze in a pre-dawn stupor. In the silvery moonlight of the floating moon, the white coats of the tall pines were dully illuminated. I pressed the tangent 3 times. The radio station squeaked softly. The signal was received. In half an hour I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. An elephant dragged a bound maiden onto the porch. She was kicking, trying to say something and trying her best to spit out my glove sticking out of her mouth. "Shall we untie her?" said the kind-hearted elephant doubtfully. "I don't want her to bite us, do I? We'll turn him over to Papa and let him sort it out. We've done our job." Elephant and I took the girl under our arms and dragged her to the helicopter, which was about to land. The pilot kept the engine running, and the propeller blades were spinning, bringing up a snowstorm all around. I shouted to the head of security, who was standing on the top step of the gangway. He held out his hand and pulled the girl inside the car. I threw the machine gun behind my back and began to climb the ladder. Victor shouted something, and somehow a shot rang out very loudly behind me. I felt as if I had been hit in the shoulders with a sledgehammer and the light went out. Consciousness returned in pieces. First I felt my legs, then my arms, then a piercing cold. When I lifted my eyelids, a blinding white light hit my eyes. Bright and sharp as an awl. I blinked a few times, but it was all right. Recent events came rushing out of my mind. The cabin, the girl, the helicopter. And a shot in the back. Something rustled on the side. "What's the matter? Are you awake?" The elephant, as usual, didn't choose his words. "What was that?" I spoke slowly, not yet fully recovered. It was a clean-up job. First us, then us. The elephant spat. Honestly, I don't understand it myself. Who was shooting? There was one question that bothered me so far. Yes, our guide. He burrowed into the snowdrift and waited for the command. He hit you in the backpack, and there is a titanium plate, if anything. Elephant wiped his face with his palm. You were thrown off the ramp. How did you do that? Oh, that's right. While he was shooting at you, I cut him off with my machine gun. Too bad I missed the head of security. Managed to lock the door. The elephant smiled. But that's all right, I'll get him too. I lay there, afraid to move, the pain in my back throbbing in jerks. The butt of the metal-hinged butt of the machine gun was pressing painfully against my ribs. The machine gun was under my belly. Slowly my ability to think returned. Though there wasn't much thought in my head. Everything was clear. We had been cheated. Moreover, it had been planned from the start. But the real question was, how was I supposed to get out of here? How long had I been unconscious? I turned on my side and tried to pull my gun out. About half an hour. The elephant tried to help me. The chopper took off right away? Almost immediately. Made a circle and went northeast. Right, flew to Katanga. At last I took out my gun. It's necessary to get out from here, the sooner the better. As though having heard my words, a wolf howl was heard in the distance. A long and dreary howl. The forest rangers are coming. Sniffed elephant. I did not share his amusement. Nonsense, if anything, we'll stay at the lodge, it has strong walls. Cheerfully told the elephant. I do not think. They'll be back, and they know you're alive. What do they need witnesses for? I was well on my way to the worst-case scenario. The hum of a helicopter engine could be heard coming from behind the forest. A helicopter was seen over the tops of the pines. The helicopter swooped over the clearing and made a second circle. In our white camouflage cloaks we were invisible from above, and this gave us hope. The helicopter came into view again, and I saw the rocket fly off its console and hurtle downward, leaving a trail of blue behind it. It struck right in the middle of the cabin. There were flames and then an explosion. The heat and blast wave hit us, and we dropped our heads in the snow as if on cue. When we came to our senses, the hum of the helicopter was already far away. Well, that's all. It was finally cleared out. I looked in the direction of the hut. The cabin was on fire. Clouds of bluish smoke rose over the taiga. A little later the fuel tanks burst. After waiting 10 minutes and making sure that the helicopter had finally flown away, I got to my feet, shook off the clinging snow. Get up, see if there's anything left. I hung the machine gun on my chest and headed toward the burnout cabin. A few fallen trees lay ahead. The heat of the fire hit in the face. There was a pile of burning logs on the place of the hut. A fallen fence. I walked another 50 meters, gradually slowing down. I could not come closer. The heat from the fire did not let me in. The fire was still burning at full strength. I stopped. Nearby the elephant was breathing heavily. The situation was changing like a child's kaleidoscope. The actions of our enemies, and they were definitely enemies, were impossible to guess. It would be nice if they thought we were dead. But who can predict what the enemy is thinking? What shall we do? Came up with the big lively elephant. We have to go. I pulled out a map. To the nearest village was 80 kilometers. It would take us 2 days to ski across the virgin land. We had dried food, water all around. I pointed at the snow. But what to do with the wolves? Suddenly, I felt the prickly stare again. My heart treacherously fluttered. Again? I think we're being followed. I looked at Elephant. You don't feel a thing. My partner lifted his chin as if sniffing. There's something in the air. Unsurely, he muttered. We need to find the skis. I turned my head and suddenly saw what I should have seen immediately. 150 meters from the fire, a small helicopter was standing by the woods. Of course, it could have been ruined by the explosion, but it was worth a try. It was a sin not to take such a chance. Especially the only chance. I turned to Elephant. But he was staring at something on the other side of the clearing. Look! With a sort of gasp he spoke. I put the binoculars to my eyes. At the very edge of the forest, a solitary figure, resembling a man, was standing openly. Reminiscent indeed. Overgrown with black fur, it moved slowly toward us on two legs. Instead of a human head, it had a bear's head on its shoulder, or something like that. The beast walked slowly toward us. As if it knew we had nowhere to go. A cold terror began to creep into my soul, my legs began to fall as cotton, and a strange voice sounded in my head. There's no way out, there's only death ahead. I looked at the elephant. He was staring silently at the approaching monster. I grabbed my partner by the collar of his jacket and dragged him to the helicopter. The helicopter was intact, I saw it from a distance. The next thing was a game of poker. Whether there was fuel in the tank, and if so, how much. I kicked the elephant inside and didn't hesitate to get in. The elephant came to his senses. His eyes began to make sense. He unscrewed the now unnecessary silencer and cocked the bolt. Oh, pity it's not a big caliber. Sorry, no grenade launcher. I was tinkering with the dashboard. I'd never seen such a helicopter before. But all such machines have typical controls. And they don't need an ignition key. I took a quick look around the instrumentation. Everything was familiar, in general, no surprises. Something I've never seen before. I've never practiced on this model, but all improvements are tertiary. Chanting a prayer to myself, I reached for the right toggle switches. I started the engine. The twin screw rotated with a whistling rustle at idle. It needed at least a little warming up. Looked at the fuel gauge. Looks like half a tank. Turned up the revs, the engine howled right away. Buckle up! I yelled to the elephant. I lifted the car into the air. The helicopter pecked its nose a few times, wobbled, but obediently gained the proper altitude. I looked down. There the creature was raving, missing its prey. I lifted the helicopter another 5 meters. I increased the throttle and headed northwest toward the village. How long have you been flying in helicopters? Said the elephant, who had fallen silent. You won't believe it, it's the first time I've flown. The man put his elbows on the table and looked intently at the interlocutor. I ask you again, Ivan, where's Edward? Ivan Rokotov felt like being interrogated. It seemed to him that his father saw right through him. Daddy, I haven't seen him for a long time. Right after his divorce from Samantha, he disappeared. Disappeared? Have you been looking for him? The owner of one of the largest steel companies in the country shook his head incredulously. Why did they divorce? Edward, for some reason, decided that Johnny slept with his wife, so he made a scandal. Ivan looked uncertainly at his youngest son. For some reason decided? Out of the blue? Stivan Rokotov grinned. But his grin reeked of coldness. And then he divorced and disappeared? There must be a reason, a good reason. What would a man went to such radical measures? I know my grandson, he does not make hasty decisions. Grandfather grimaced. Stivan, you cannot worry. A young woman standing behind the chair put her hand on the man's shoulder. Grandfather affectionately covered her palm with his own, instantly drawing a disgruntled grimace of his son. All right, I understand everything. Sit in the corridor. The grandfather turned to the young man frozen at the window. Serioza, call my daughter-in-law. A rather young woman entered the office. She walked uncertainly to a long table. Hello, Vera. Please sit down. Maybe some tea or coffee. Have you ever had breakfast today? The old man's eyes shone with love. It was clear that he loves his daughter-in-law and does not show her any ostentatious respect. Hello, Papa. Vera looked at her father-in-law warily. Vera, what happened while I was away? Why did Edward leave the family? Vera cried. He accused Samantha of cheating on him and of having a son by another man. Why did he think that? Grandfather frowned. He caught Samantha with Johnny in bed. Vera covered her face with her hands. He beat Johnny and left. Beaten? It is Johnny Fabulous luck. I would have killed. The woman standing behind the chair soothingly stroked Grandpa on the shoulder. Where could Edward be now? He was at the trial with his army friend, Elephant, I think. Maybe he's at his place now. The old man thought about it. Victoria. Make an order. He raised his head and looked at the young woman. Everything will be done, Stephen. She was writing something in a notebook. Vera. Grandpa smiled. I invite you to the restaurant. Let's have lunch and talk. He got up from his chair, showing that the official part was over. In my time, I took everything from military service. Even the ability to drive a helicopter. But that skill saved our lives today. Elephant cursed beside me. The helicopter shook. Squeezing the levers, I leveled the car. We were on the same course. When I checked the compass, I realized that I wasn't that far off course. A red light flashed on the dashboard, indicating that I had about 10 minutes fuel left. I began to descend, looking for a place to land. The landing was not very soft. The helicopter visibly bumped against the frozen ground. The spinning blades raised a small snowstorm all around. At last the engine stopped and there was silence. I pulled out a map and tried to pinpoint our location. It was 20 kilometers to the village. But it had to be done on foot, even without skis. We crawled out of the cabin and looked around. I readjusted the straps of my rucksack and stepped towards the river. Elephant followed me holding my submachine gun at the ready. One by one we followed each other through unfamiliar terrain, having a vague idea where we were going. At last we reached the shore. Time was already rolling toward evening and, to all appearances, it would soon be dark. We should have thought of the night and looked for a suitable place to stay. But it was nowhere to be found. Suddenly I saw a lopsided wooden hut near the shore, among tall larch trees. We came closer. The hut had once been made of thick larch logs. It was undoubtedly a winter hut, but it had been abandoned long ago. The cabin had sunk almost up to the windows into the snow over time, and the roof was damaged in some places. The windows still had intact glass, but were boarded up. The door, oddly enough, was intact. I gingerly pulled the wrought iron handle toward me. The door clung to the icy low threshold and reluctantly opened, revealing a dark opening. With weapons at the ready, we stepped into the darkness and stopped in confusion. It was pitch black inside the hut. Rummaging through my backpack, I took out a flashlight and pressed a button. I involuntarily took a step back. Right in front of us, at arm's length, the flashlight illuminated a human skull, yellowed with time, bearing its rare crooked teeth and a smile. A homemade knife was lying on the side, with a long, rusty blade and a handle carved out of bone. Something gleamed beside the knife, reflecting the light of the flashlight. A ring! It was very old, and appeared to be of silver. I put it quickly into the breast pocket of my jacket without saying anything to Elephant. Meanwhile, it was getting dark. I took a candle out of my backpack, melted it with a lighter, and pinned it to the table. I lit it, and the room was illuminated by a dim light, giving it a semblance of coziness. Elephant took a piece of tarpaulin out of his backpack. We spread it out on the floor and stacked the remains neatly. We took it out of the hut, intending to bury it in the morning. I made a fire in the stove. I estimated that wood should be enough till morning. I began to lay out things, taking them out of the backpack one by one. Elephant opened cans of stew and porridge with a knife and put them on the stove. There were old nails hammered into the wall of the hut. We hung our jackets and weapons on them. The aroma of canned stew, familiar to anyone who served in the army, was already spreading through the room. I pushed 2 roughly cut stools to the table. There were no plates, so I had to eat out of the cans. I carefully put the hot cans on the table and took out an aluminum spoon. At that time Elephant was cutting bread with a knife. I looked at him, with a special, understandable only to old soldiers. With a look. You can. His eyes told me. I put my hand into my backpack and pulled out an army flask of alcohol and a worn mug. The flask clanked on its edge, and soon the fiery water poured down Elephant's throat. I followed him and drank the drink of the gods, quickly chugging it down with some spring water from another flask. The elephant even stopped chewing, watching the process closely. "Don't forget to exhale, Commander," my partner advised me with the gallantry of a saloon-goer. Elephant and I drank some more and got ready for bed. The night was restless. Several times in half-dream I heard strange sounds outside. I did not rouse the elephant, and sat all night clutching my rifle. In the morning the strange sounds stopped. An eerie silence fell. It was still dark when I woke up the elephant. "We must get out of here," I whispered as I put on my backpack. There was no time to explain. I took my pistol at the ready, safety off. The elephant looked at me understandingly, asking no questions. "We must go down to the river and follow the riverbed. There is less snow there than on the bank," I whispered in elephant's ear, as if I feared someone might hear me. "You go first, I'll cover." "Come on, let's go." By evening we were in the village. The next day a passing lumber truck took elephant and me to the district center. From there we flew on an old plane to the capital of the region. Our hometown greeted us with snowfall and cold winds. Despite the bad weather, everything around us spoke of the imminent arrival of the new year. The multicolored lights on the artificial Christmas trees shone festively. The unworn lights of advertisements were burning enticingly. People rushed to buy gifts for relatives and food for the New Year table. They say one shouldn't leave unfinished business in the outgoing year. Elephant and I were well aware of this tradition and decided to find a customer for our Taiga Odyssey. We sold the guns back East Country. A local amateur bought them for a good price. With this money we were able to buy tickets home. We managed to carry everything else, including knives, in our luggage. There was even enough money for a cab from the airport. I reached my hiding place when it was already dark. The site was covered with snow and there was no sign of the house. I rummaged over the door, the key was there. Soon the stove was humming merrily. I made myself some dinner from what I found in the fridge and sat down in a chair in front of the stove. Helen was gone. Judging by the fact that the room was not her things, she had gone quite a long time. Most likely right after we parted. Was I upset? A little. It was sad that nothing in my life is permanent. Sooner or later people leave me. Helen left, too. I poured some vodka and took a classic pickle out of a jar. Well, good riddance. Suddenly I remembered my find in an abandoned winter hut. I took the trophy ring out of my jacket pocket and carefully put it on my palm, trying to guess its weight. It was obviously a man's ring. I turned on the desk lamp and scrutinized the ring. It was a massive ring, without any frills. An equilateral cross within a circle. I took the ring out of sight. It looks beautiful. I couldn't take my eyes off the ring, and somewhere inside I was filled with fear. I could not understand what it was. It became hard to breathe, my heart was pounding under my throat, fear came up from its hidden depths, and with its sticky claws it enveloped and bound my whole body. I shook my head trying to pull myself together. And suddenly, as if by some unknown force, I put a ring on the ring finger of my right hand. At once it felt hot. The heat rose up my arm to my shoulder and spread all over my body. My heart began to pound even harder. I began to fall into a bottomless well. And a moment later, everything was gone. I was sound asleep. I woke up to the pounding of the front door. I looked at my watch. It's a little early for elephant. I turned my head. An unfamiliar man was standing in the doorway, looking at me curiously. "Hello, Edward." The man said a polite hello. Yes, this is an unforgivable joint. Not locking the door behind me. They could have killed me in the night. Suddenly I calmed down. Indeed, if they wanted to, they stabbed me. I wondered if it was from the client, or someone else. I glanced around the room. There was nothing suitable at hand. If I went at him with my bare hands, he would shoot me in flight. The man seemed to read my mind. "Edward, you're not in any danger. No need to beat me or maim me." The man smiled. "Steven wants to talk to you." "Is he here?" "How long has he been here?" "Grandpa's really here." "It's been a week now." "Get ready, he's waiting for you." The stranger continued to stand in the doorway, making no attempt to enter the room. At that moment, a cell phone began beeping in his pocket. He put it to his ear and listened in silence for a few minutes. Then he handed it to me. "It's for you, Edward." I heard in the receiver the familiar voice of Grandpa. "Come over, we need to talk. Now you know everything." Grandpa was looking at me intently, and his gaze was penetrating me to my very soul. He got up from his chair and poured me half a glass of bourbon. "I think it's about time." He put the glass in front of me. I automatically poured the whiskey into my mouth without even feeling the taste. What my grandfather had told me shook me to the core. Such filth and filth I had never seen in my life. My whole being protested against the truth. But I had no reason not to believe the only person I had left who was close to me. For the past 5 years, all around me was nothing but betrayal and lies. How stupid do you have to be to ignore the obvious for a long time? And there were clues. They were there all the time. But I did not want to see them, trying to hide in the world I had invented. I remembered my wedding. With a bride in a white wedding dress, with witnesses. The same order. Vicky's surprise at my family's visit. Joy at the generous gifts. Too far-fetched, too artificial. Samantha knew about the apartment and the car. She knew in advance. And she played on her joy and surprise. The first lie. Then it became a habit. My long frequent business trips. Her love affair with Johnny. And then with my father. A family society girl. And she seemed to like it. A wife for everyone. But there was a problem with the baby. An unplanned pregnancy. It had to be my twin brothers. There's no DNA test to find out who the father is. But, no, she got pregnant by my ex-father, the lustful idiot. That's why the DNA test in court clearly showed that the baby wasn't mine. And I didn't hear a peep out of him. After all, it was clear that it is not from Johnny. Who knew? Everyone but me. And my mother. She knew everything, nothing was hidden from her. She knew and didn't say anything. Was she afraid of her husband, or did she dislike her own son so much? How can you love one and hate the other so much? Samantha is understandable. Who am I? A beggar, an outcast. And Johnny is the heir to a huge empire. Rich and successful. There's nothing to be gained from living with me. A stale life and hopeless need. On the other hand, a rich brother-in-law and father-in-law. That's where a child comes in handy. To tie him down. And enjoy life. What about love? Come on, we're grown-up girls. More money, more love. I looked at Grandpa longingly. God, what am I in for? Can I get another drink? My interlocutor showed no emotion. I nodded. One glass was obviously not enough. I remembered about Helen. And there's a lie. Everything had been set up. Both the failed kidnapping and the beating. The fake love and the passionate breakup. And here I fell for it. I believed it. What a savior. Romantic jerk. And she listened to my conversations with Elephant and all leaked Johnny. Well, they did their best. They made up a fairy tale about a stolen daughter and lustful kidnappers. The daughter was played by a colleague of hers. Yes, it was clearly visible at the lodge. A society girl is a society girl. And I didn't notice. Damn it is Batman. I remembered how Helen was beaten up in the alley. Very natural. They hurt her, but gently. Helen truly loved me. But not for me, but for the money. I wonder if Johnny had time to sleep with her. Probably not. It's not his format to mess with a common society girl. Everything was set up from the beginning. Except for the evil taiga beast and the wolves. There, in the taiga, and I was supposed to perish. Forever, without a trace. No man, no problem. I remembered the attentive look of Victor at our meeting in the restaurant. Yes, and his face was vaguely familiar to me. Also missed a clue. Yes, what a scout. Thank God the elephant is real. Otherwise, I might as well hang myself. I sat there trying to figure out what to do with all this. It was like I was burned out from the inside out. The door clicked, and a young woman entered the office. She walked through the office and stopped behind my grandfather. I looked questioningly into his eyes. Make up your mind. It seemed that grandfather read my mind. In half an hour, board of directors. I think that your presence is necessary. The owner and CEO of Engineering Group stood up. Victoria will help you pick out a suitable suit. Grandfather kissed his assistant's hand, showing me more than just a working relationship. Are you going to put me on the board of directors? Frankly, I was a little puzzled. Instead of who? Don't you have any idea? Grandfather smiled for the first time during our conversation. Was it because of me? Decided to push your favorite grandson to a well-fed position? I answered defiantly. That too. But not only. Your father and brother have been stealing. They have opened false accounts and put the company's money into them. It's good that we managed to block their access to the main cash funds. Grandpa looked at his assistant. I got up and headed for the door. The suit was picked up quickly. I put on a cream shirt under my jacket and tied a dark blue tie. I stopped in front of the mirror. I looked at me glamorous office clerk. Only the unusual ring on my right hand gave my image some mysterious personality. In the corridor, in front of the door leading to the small conference room, Johnny was excitedly circling around. What do you want here? He hissed when he saw me. But I saw a glimpse of disappointment in his eyes. Well, of course, I did not disappear. Unpleasant surprise. Victoria ignored Johnny hissing and opened the door. Come in, Edward. Everyone was already assembled. No one knew me, so many surprised looked at me, confused with Johnny. My grandfather stood up from his seat and made a few steps towards me. Gentlemen, let me introduce you to my grandson, Edward Rokotov. Have a seat. Grandfather pointed me to an empty seat at the large round table and sat down again in the chairman's chair. I have a question. I heard my former father's voice. Why is there an outsider on the board of directors? Indeed. Grandfather was not embarrassed. But we're going to correct that mistake now. A young man standing behind my grandfather's chair put a blue folder and a pen on the table. This is a notarized document on the transfer to my grandson of 51% of the shares in the concern. Grandfather signed the document in a large space in front of him. Gentlemen, he continued, I propose that Mr. Edward Rokotov be put on the board of directors of the company. The board members raised their hands in unison. Just a minute, gentlemen. My ex-father spoke up. The number of board members is always constant. It cannot change, according to the rules in the company charter. We cannot introduce a new member at this time. Really? Grandfather smiled. I propose to remove Mr. Ivan Rokotov from the board. I was sitting in a deep armchair behind a huge table. On a leather sofa to the right of the table nestled grandfather. You are too early to take over the reins of the company, and I'm still in my right mind. Grandpa laughed. There was a knock on the door. Victoria put a plate of fruit and a bottle of cognac on the coffee table. Victoria, stay here. Grandfather looked at his assistant. She smiled and sat down on the edge of the sofa. Frankly, I was a little strained by the relationship of my grandfather and his assistant. Who was she to him? A mistress? It was the first thing that came to mind, looking at their relationship. But was she too young for my grandfather? It was as if my grandfather read my mind. Victoria, the daughter of an old friend of mine. He died tragically with his wife a quarter of a century ago. Victoria was taken by the guardianship authorities to a boarding school. Grandfather stroked the young woman tenderly on the arm. I tracked her down, took her away, and adopted her. She's been with me ever since. I was a little taken aback. Victoria looked at me and blushed. P.S. Young man. This is not silver. The old jeweler chewed his lips. This is platinum. I must tell you, it's a very old ring, you know what I mean. Look for yourself. Boris gave me a magnifying glass. Well, what do you say? I trust you completely. I politely put the tool on the table. And can you name the time of manufacture, at least approximately? Well, somewhere around the beginning of the 17th century. At that time such rings were in fashion. It was made by a good jeweler. Fine work. By the way, the enamel is English. At that time. So, your ring was made in Europe, most likely in England or Scotland. I wonder who it belonged to and how it came to be in our country. I put it on my finger. Alas, I do not know that. The old jeweler shook his hands. Well, are you ready? I looked at the elephant. Yes, I am. When is the car? Elephant finished lacing up his boots. At that moment the cell phone rang. The helicopter circled over the cold water of the river and then made its way down to the rocky shore. The rotating blades shook the tops of the firs and pines growing along the shore. I was the first to jump out. Then I took my wife in my arms. She flatly refused to let me go alone. The elephant handed me my rucksacks and weapons. I waved to the pilot and jumped out onto the rocky beach. The helicopter hovered over the bank for a while, then took off sharply upwards and raced along the river bed. Soon the sound of its engine faded around a bend. A motorboat slipped out of nowhere. It turned toward the shore and soon jerked its nose into the coastal sand. The man in the stern jumped into the water and pulled the boat to the shore. Good day. How was your trip? He smiled in a friendly way. We shook hands and started to load equipment. Well, let's go. I hugged and kissed Victoria. What do you think of our story today? I think the husband is absolutely right in this situation to catch his wife with his twin brother, and soon to find out that she has been cheating on him for more than a year with him is very sad. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.